Good morning.
Morning, Phil. Phil, this is a great lesson, isn't it? I love this
Great
lesson.
lesson. Talks about fear.
Yeah.
What are we afraid of? We have different fears in life. There was a picture in the study book about had a spider in a bathtub.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know anybody that freaks out over spiders, but I know it's a phobia where people are just crazy afraid of a spider. I know a couple of women that just really freak out over a mouse.
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes, we do. I know one for sure.
So there's a lot of things that different people fear. Getting up on a high ladder or something crawling on your skin,
Yeah, yeah.
and being in front of a bunch of people speaking.
Yeah,
Some people
yeah.
lock up. You see sport stars, athletes, sometimes they get up to the line and the fear of failure, the fear of letting their teammates down, they just choke.
Yep.
They can't do it.
And it's like with golfers, the good golfers can stand over a putt that's worth sometimes millions of dollars. And they're just as cool, as calm as they could be. Now, the ones that aren't that good will choke on something like that, but most of them just stand up there and it doesn't bother them. With me,
There's something we've encountered in the last couple of years quite a bit. Fear of getting sick, fear of dying, fear of death, and not being completely certain what's going to happen to you when your life is over.
that's the good one of the many good parts about being a Christian. If you know 100% in your heart what's going to happen to you when you die, that fear of death is not there.
Yeah, it shouldn't
It
be.
shouldn't be, because you know where you're going to be is much better than where you are now.
Fear is a crippler.
Yeah.
It's a crippler to a Christian or a non-Christian. Fear sometimes can paralyze a person where they can't talk, where they can't walk. The Bible tells us that's one of the reasons that Joshua is one of my favorite books of the Bible. There in the first chapter, time after time after time after time, God tells Joshua not to fear. Do not fear. Do not fear. Go forth. Do not fear. And 5 or 6 times there in the first couple chapters, he tells him that. You know, it must be important that we as Christians walk fearless.
Without fear, yeah.
And how do we get that way? Well, it doesn't come natural sometimes. There are things out there that we should be concerned with that can, but there are poisonous spiders. There are poisonous snakes. There are things that
Can harm you.
can harm us. But usually God wants us to walk without fear. In today's session, we're looking at the life of Abram again. Abram was called by God to go to Canaan, and he obeyed God, fearless. But the Canaanites possessed the land, and he passed on through, left the most desirable and fertile territory to his north, and migrated through to the south. So it brought on a bunch of new challenges. Well, while he was there, he's right at the edge of the Negev desert. So it would have to be hard for he and his family there in the midst of a drought. To be right there in the edge of the desert, and the people above him surely were also hurting from the drought. But as we see, that won't be his final destination. That's not the place that God had for him. But we see, because of this drought, he had a fear of his family not having the essentials.
Right.
And we'll get into that a little more. And Abraham did, or Abram as he's currently called, Abram did something that he probably shouldn't do. He made a rash decision. And we'll see why. And we'll see just what he did. We'll talk about it some more. Let's look at the scripture.
And then eventually we're going to see what he came back to, what he should have done to start with.
Yeah.
In the very last of the verses. We're looking at Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 13 to start with. It says, there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to stay there for a while because the famine in the land was severe. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, look, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. They will kill me, but let you live. Please say you're my sister so that it will go well for me because of you, and my life will be spared on your account. And Phil, you've already mentioned the fact that there was a famine going on, and the best land that Abram could have used for all of his livestock was taken up by the Canaanites. And he didn't want to attack them at this time. He didn't want to make them mad, upset. So he decides to go to Egypt. What do we not find in these verses, Phil? He goes on to say that he asked Sarah to be his sister, to tell him he was his sister rather than his wife.
Well, the first thing we find that he has evidently made this decision on his own.
Is there
to pack up and go.
Any indication that he talked to God about this, asked God what to do?
The Bible doesn't tell us if there was.
He was afraid. He was afraid of the drought. He was also going to be afraid of the Egyptians, as we see here, because he asked Sarah to tell him he was his sister. And that wasn't a full lie, Phil, because in reality they were half brother and half sister, right?
Right.
We found it out later in the scripture, but it was a lie. In God's sight, it was a lie because he was misrepresenting the truth between him and Sarah being husband and wife. So he didn't talk to God. He did what he out of fear, he did what he wanted to do, what he thought was best on his own. This story was probably, I think Abraham was called about 2100 BC. There's a chart in my Bible that tells us that 4,000 years ago. How many times, Phil, out of fear, do we make decisions on our own without asking God what the best way for us to go is? We do it all the time. 4,000 years after the fact that Abraham did it, we still are doing it today.
Yeah.
We get concerned about what's going on around us, and we don't remember to ask God. We think we can know the answer to what would be best for us, and we move out on our own.
And in our own mind, we're actually pretty short-sighted.
Yes.
We know God sees down the road at what will be, and we'll look at that some more in these sessions.
Yeah. And the reason he said that, he thought that if she was claimed to be his sister, that Pharaoh wouldn't kill him. In fact, Pharaoh actually gave him presents because he let his sister come live with Pharaoh. Pharaoh took her into the palace and gave Abram livestock, possessions, because of that. If she had been portrayed as his wife, which she really was, he would have just killed this intruder into his country, taken over his possessions, and kept Sarah too. And Abram knew that was a possibility, and he was afraid for that, and he asked her to claim to be his sister.
So if it's a half sister, it was a half truth, wasn't it?
Yeah. It wasn't the truth that, like God wants it, is it? Wasn't
No.
It was not the truth.
No, half truth is still a lie.
Did Abram lose his faith during this time? I don't think he did, but his fear robbed him of his confidence in God to protect him. God had already told him, I'm going to make a great nation of you. That was God indicating that he was going to protect Abram through his life. But the fear that struck Abram took that confidence and threw it away. And he lost all confidence in God being able to protect him. And Abram said, I got to do something to protect myself. And Phil, we have that fear and uncertainty in our lives at times. And when we do, it takes our attention off God and puts it on ourselves. And instead of worshiping God and asking him what we should do, we get to worrying about things. Next thing you know, we're going out over here on our own in this direction or in that direction,
Yeah.
and not looking at God.
But you know, if you think about it, let's don't jump all over Abram, because now lack of essentials, lack of food, lack of water, lack of shelter is going to make a person do strange things.
True.
Maybe that he wouldn't normally do.
And it wasn't just him and Sarah, it was his family.
Whole bunch.
Thousands of people, hundreds of people, at least, if not thousands of people. We know it's thousands of head of livestock that he had to take care of. So yeah, there was a lot at stake there, right?
Right.
But we know that God can handle lots of things that are at stake when we do something. He can take over any situation that we have going and put us in the right position.
I guess the biggest thing here was he just didn't talk to God.
He didn't
about
talk to God. We've seen him do that before, and seen God talk to him. God kind of left him on his own there, didn't you? Don't you think, God, let's just see what he's going to do?
Well, I think he does that with us too, you know. Sometimes.
Let's move on into 17 through 20.
Well, so we know that his wife went with the king and was being prepared to meet the king. Now, I don't believe the king was ever with her. However, as she went to the palace, and whether it was a divine thing like in Abimelech over in chapter 20, or whether it was the Pharaoh figuring out from the timeline when all these things started happening, these plagues that started occurring to his family, he figured out that this was it.
He knew something was up, didn't he?
Let's look here. It says, but the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues because of Abram's wife Sarah. So Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, what have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now here's your wife, take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave his men orders about him, and they sent him away with his wife and all he had. So when Abram arrived in Egypt, Sarah did capture the attention of the princes of Egypt there, and as they came into the nation, word got back to the Pharaoh that he had this beautiful sister. And so what does Pharaoh do? Beautiful new woman in the land, and Sarah was brought to him.
He can have whatever he wants as a king.
In exchange for Sarah, Pharaoh lavished Abram with many valuable gifts. Camels, donkeys, female donkeys, the Bible tells us, male donkeys, camels, host of livestock.
Yep.
And as he did that, what do you think Abram's thinking? I mean, your actions have consequences. Now, he's being lavished all these gifts. What do you think he was thinking about? When the bottom line, when his needs have been met here, you know, he's evidently got food and water, and he's got a bunch more livestock.
I think at that point in time, he might be thinking, I've got by with this.
Yeah.
I've made it, until Pharaoh comes back to him.
Yeah.
It worked the way I wanted it to, maybe. But he still,
he got many things. He got male and female servants, one of which is believed to be Hagar.
yep.
Okay, that was his wife's servant. So ownership of her is going to cause some relationship problems between he and Sarah in the future.
And so did the livestock, really, because
It did, because he and Lot had to separate.
had
and
so much livestock they couldn't stay together.
They couldn't. They eating up too much ground, weren't they?
Yep.
So a fellow can let the possessions and things possess him in the pursuit of money or things. That often happens.
The writer asked a question, Phil, at this time, how did Sarah feel when he asked her to do that?
Don't you imagine she felt abandoned?
That's what I'm thinking.
Abram was concerned with his own
Right.
physical life being taken from him, and that's understandable. But at what point can that trickery that he was using to stay alive, and it might lead to material wealth, but in the end, it's going to come back and bite you somewhere, and it did him. So Pharaoh, it did Pharaoh. You know, he's trying to buy some arrangement here. And so it comes back and bites him in the form of plagues on his family. And he figures it out. Now, why did the Lord strike Pharaoh with all these plagues when he was really kind of innocent in the whole thing?
I think Pharaoh was innocent, but I think God was also protecting Abram at this point in time.
I think that's all it's about, because it was pretty commonplace back in that day for them to make acquaintances with kings of foreign lands or neighboring countries and make marriages between the families to consolidate their treaties.
Right, exactly. That was not anything that Pharaoh did. That was not common in that day and age.
That's right. So Solomon, you know, he later would form an alliance with Pharaoh and have a wife. But as he did this, and he made this marriage of convenience, God's design, is that his design for us to have more than one wife?
No.
His
Bible's very
design,
clear.
monogamy.
Monogamous.
Be monogamous, not polygamy.
Yeah.
One man plus one woman. So, despite the practices of the day, that's what God willed. And he went against God's design for marriage, in that he probably had several of these wives. And that alone wasn't the thing, it was who he was with. And then his protection of Sarah and Abram, down he goes. Now, how do you think he felt after he found out this is his wife? We know he felt guilty.
Pharaoh?
Yeah.
I think he's also mad.
I'd say
I think
he
he
was
got
hot.
very mad. He was
Why
probably.
didn't he kill him? Why didn't Pharaoh have him
Well,
killed? Usually when you deceive the king out of something, there again, I think God's hand
That was God protecting Abraham,
just
I believe.
protecting him. And he would have done that if he had stayed there where he was.
Yeah.
You know, in the Negev.
Right.
He would have provided for him in
Right.
some way. God, for whatever reason, was gracious to him, and Pharaoh simply returned Sarah to him. He needlessly acted in fear, but claiming that she was his sister and not his wife. There again, you do stupid things out of fear sometimes.
Do you think this had an impact on Sarah later on when she sees the lack of faith or lack of confidence in God that Abraham
Well,
exhibited here?
And I'm thinking from today's woman's standpoint, Yeah, you're the one that left me with that Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And you want me to do what?
Yeah,
Fix you something to eat?
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me think about it.
We're probably even going to study this later when Sarah questions and laughs at God, laughs because God says you're still going to have kids. And Sarah probably thinks back to this time, well, you didn't trust him back then. Why should I trust him now?
Yeah.
And so I think it had an impact on her later on, her confidence in God.
And I think God blessed the Pharaoh for letting him go.
Yeah.
And he sent everything that he had given him. He didn't take back any of the gifts or anything. He just sent everything with him and said, just take her and go. But his failure to seek out God in obey God in the face of fear, it only leads to trouble. And that's the same way with us. When we act on our own, chances are we'll do the wrong thing most time.
Yep. The writer even talks about this failure on Abraham to trust God and have confidence in God might have even impacted Pharaoh in the fact that if Abram had not told the truth, God would have still protected Abraham, like you've already said. But Abram might have been able to show what the true God was to the Pharaoh and to the people of Egypt. He missed an opportunity there because of his fear.
Lose opportunity. Fear will cause you to lose opportunity, lose respect.
Yep.
Loses God's blessing.
Yeah.
And it emboldens the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
if you're cowering in fear, whoever's against you is going to be emboldened by that, aren't they?
So
So what's the benefits of faith if we're
not going to obey it or listen to it or have faith and have confidence and go out on our own, there is no benefit to that faith, right? At that point.
That's right. But if you do show a genuine faith, it emboldens others who feel hopeless.
That's true.
You know, they can look at you and your life and what God's brought you through. You can share those stories with them. And, you know, that's our testimony, what God brings us through.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have no reason to fear because God's got our back even through death.
Exactly
We
right.
go, we have everlasting life. And you share that with others, and it emboldens their faith. So we look at the next scripture.
Yeah, let's see Pharaoh's come and said, get out of here.
Yeah.
Don't ever come back. It's really essentially what he's saying. So we see in chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he, his wife, and all he had, and Lot with him. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. That's the first time we've heard him talk much about his silver and his gold. I think that was some gifts from Pharaoh. He went by stages from Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built the altar. And Abram called on the name of the Lord there. When did Abram realize, I messed up?
When he was banished.
When he got kicked out of Egypt.
When he was banished, and he somehow got out of there with his skin.
In fact, richer than he was.
He knew that God had done it. Because all the other countries in the day and everything, the common practice would have had him drawn and quartered.
Exactly right. He would have been dead before sundown that day. Isn't that like us when we realize, first off, how long do you think that trip was from Egypt back to, how long do you think that trip felt like it was for Abram from Egypt back to Bethel? It was a long time. Even if it was a few months. It's one of those deals where when you know you've done something that you shouldn't have done, and God's convicted you of it, and you either need to talk to someone or you need to tell the church what you've done, until you get that opportunity to do what you should do to right something, it seems like forever. And I know that seemed like 3 times as long of a trip back as it did getting there.
Yeah.
And what was Abraham's, every time somebody looked at Abraham during that trip back, at Abram, I keep calling him Abraham, but at Abram, my thinking is, Abram said, quit looking at me like that. I know I messed up. I know I did wrong. I'm going to go back and try to make it right. I'm going back to where I...
There's the man that gave his wife away. That's
exactly right. I think he felt that everybody was pointing their finger at him the entire time that he got back until he was able to get back to a place he was comfortable and spoke to God about it. I think that was the longest trip, longer than the trip down from where he came in up northern part of Israel down
to
Haran. That's right. So I think it was a long trip for him, but he went back to a place he knew, and he went back for one purpose, and that was to call on the name of the Lord. And now, what was he going to tell God? What do you think was going through his mind that what he was going to do when he got back to Ai, that place where the altar was?
I think it's like people today, and we I've done it myself. You go back to the place where you found God. You go back to the place, the physical place where you spoke to God, where God spoke to your heart, and you say, God, I messed up.
You go back in humility. You go back and you say, I messed up. I want to confess what I did. I want to express my faith in you once again. I want to ask you to take me back into your arms. And of course, we know that God never did let him go, or he'd been dead. God was with him the whole time. But he went back to beg for God's mercy, to ask for forgiveness, to humble himself before God. All of those things is what Abram went back to do. What did he learn, Phil? What did Abram learn through this ordeal he just went through?
The same thing we do when we go through our trials. We learn to trust God.
Yep.
We learn that he's there. He'll bring us through these things.
Yep.
We'll come out different. We'll come out stronger.
Yeah. God was with him all the time. Never left him. Even when Abram took off on his own, God was with him at that point in time. Never did leave him at all. Even when he messed up and depended upon his own self. Same thing with us, Phil. That's why I said earlier that this happened 4,000 years ago, 4,300 years ago, but it happens every day in our lives. Not every day, but we all have times in our life when we mess up, when we don't follow God, when we go out on our own. And when we realize what we've done, or somebody brings it to our attention, sometimes we have to be brought to our attention. And that's probably what happened here. Wonder what Abram thought when Pharaoh came over the hill. Actually, Pharaoh sent his guys out, didn't he? He said, I bet Abraham knew something was up then. What's going to happen? And same thing happens to us today. It's amazing how the Bible is relevant, just as relevant today as it was when it first occurred. Same stories are still relevant today.
People mess up. And he's always there. Those things haven't changed.
Yeah. Yep.
Looking into the future, Abram's got a lot more challenges coming up.
It's not the end of his challenges.
Spiritual military battles. God told him he's going to give him Canaan, but he's not going to just walk in.
No.
And so there was a lot of stuff. Fear couldn't be a part of his existence, his makeup in the future.
Don't you think when he went through this, and when we go through things like this, it strengthens us? We hope that it strengthens us and helps us to realize that God is with us no matter what we do, or no matter what comes along in our life, whether we did something or something else occurs that we don't have control of. It helps us to be strengthened.
It does. It strengthens us, and it also humbles us, because we know how great God is. And he'll do this for me.
Yeah.
He will watch over and care and provide and all this for me.
Yep.
It's humbling, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Brings you to a deeper faith.
Yep.
Faith where you can disciple other people, and that's where God wants us to get. Each thing that we go through, it also, this, and summing it up, be honest.
Yeah.
Be honest with your circumstance. It always works out. You know, when I was a kid, I'd like to get out of trouble if I thought I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it never worked out for you. But especially if you fear something, talk to God about it and say, God, I fear this. You know, maybe it's a child's behavior, or maybe it's your circumstance, or a lack of ability to make do, have a viable occupation, or whatever it is. Confess it. Confess that fear and take it to God, and then worship Him when He brings you through it, because He's going to bring you through it.
Exactly.
Going to bring you through it. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes.
We're looking forward to this book and studying more about Abram and his life. Y'all join us next week. We'll pick it up again.
It's another good story. Next week is about when conflict disrupts your relationships.
Oh, that never happens now.
None of us have had that happen, have we?
Have a good week.
See you later.